Well, welcome to the Reference Desk virtual seminar series that's just starting today on the 13th of February. For us in this part of the world, it might be the 12th in other parts of the world, February of 2022. And our presenter is David Haslip, and he's going to present on 3 projects that are interrelated. That's bahai.works and bahai.media and bahaipedia. Now, David was born in California. He currently lives near Cleveland, Ohio, and he's spent quite a few years now working in scanning magazines, books, film strips, videos, cassette tapes, making them available online. I think a number of us have been aware of David's project for some time, and we're very fortunate to have him present to us today. David, welcome. I hand over to you. If you can hit your share screen, and then we look forward to your presentation.
Sure, I'll do that. And of course, thank you for inviting me to join you guys. I'm excited to tell you about this project since I've been working on it for quite a long time. I want to make sure that you can hear and see me okay. You can get my attention if you can't. And I understand you probably know Zoom better than me. I think there's an option at the top of the screen. You can hit the options and then hit side by side if you want to see my presentation, or if you want to change the view for those of you that are on Zoom. And so I'll get into this. My name is David Haslip, and I run bahai.works, bahaipedia, and bahai.media. Bahaipedia was a website where individuals can go and create articles, encyclopedia-style articles on interesting events in Baha'i history. And in order to make that possible, you need a large collection of reference material, source documents, things that people can go to and search through in order to create articles. And that kind of leads to the need for bahai.works. And encyclopedia articles, of course, you want to have images and other types of media included in those articles, and that kind of leads to the need for bahai.media. So that's how those connections, how those websites relate to each other. On bahai.works, we make certain documents available. These are periodicals like Star of the West, Baha'i News. These are volumes like the Baha'i World Series, audio and visual material, film strips, newsreels, recorded talks as we can get permission to put them online. This picture here is a picture I took in my basement the other day. I just gathered up all the boxes of things that people have sent me that I've been able to digitize and put online. So I'll talk some about how the project started in its development over the years, the types of challenges we faced, and our solutions. But first, I'd like to tell you about the current status of the project and the work that's being done today. I think that would be most interesting. So the periodicals that we put online so far, this is just a partial list. The scope is limited to those documents that have been produced by the Baha'i institutions or been released through one of the Baha'i publishers. The exception to this is the World Unity magazine. That began as a secular periodical published by the World Unity Foundation, and it was connected to the Baha'i faith through Horace Hawley, who was one of its editors. And Horace Hawley had written to the Guardian in 1932 and suggested that that World Unity and the Baha'i magazine Star of the West be merged together. And eventually that happened in 1935. And so you have Baha'i News originally becoming Star of the West, becoming the Baha'i magazine Star of the West, becoming just the Baha'i magazine and merging with World Unity to eventually form the World Order series. So these are a little bit of history there, and we have all these series online. So we've been able to put a number of German periodicals online as well. I did not scan these myself, but we have these online thanks to some friends in Germany who are part of this call now. So it's fun to see familiar names and faces. When we put something online, typically what we want to do is separate out the different components of a periodical, and we'll take the text and put it in one place and take the images and put it in another. And what that allows us to do is then work with those different components separately and we can build in layers of information on the text and build in and categorize the images. And that allows people to quickly find the information that might be scattered in different places. And I'll switch to a different view now and share with you the website bahai.works. This is an example of one of the issues of Baha'i News, issue 500 from 1972. And we'll show first the original presentation, the periodical as it was originally distributed. And then at the top of the page here, there are links to text, text view, and images. And I'll go first to the images. So there's a collection of images that appeared in this periodical. And what we do is we organize and upload and scan them onto bahai.media. And so if someone wanted to go through and see, for example, here's an image of Mr. Faizi, and this periodical has a picture of Mr. Faizi. And so you can go and you can get the caption as it had appeared, the source of the original picture, and then you can find a collection. There's a category at the bottom. You can find a collection of similar images. And so we kind of gather all the information that's available, we organize it, and we make it accessible. So if someone is writing an article on bahaipedia about Mr. Faizi, they could go and get access, easy access to images in order to write that article. We can also build in different layers of information on top of the text. This is Baha'i News 178. And in the middle here, if you can see it, there is a correction listed for a previous issue. There is a couple of words were mistyped in a previous issue. And then we want to take that information and say, well, it's not really useful in issue 178. It's useful in issue 175, the issue it's referring to. And so we'll take that, we can take that correction, we can build it right into the text at the location where it needs to be. So someone can see that when they're reading this thing, it was actually not correct in the original. And here is the corrected view. That kind of addresses a little bit of a concern that I had with putting some things online, is that, you know, I take some responsibility for how people might use these things. If someone gets information that is actually incorrect or draws the wrong conclusions, I feel like I'm somehow responsible for that. So I try to build in this information to address that issue. So this is just an example, some of how the project has kind of shifted recently away from just scanning and digitizing into proofreading, into organizing, into collecting information and figuring out how to best present it in a different way. In order for this type of work to be done, you really need the text to be proofread by a person. And so a lot of the work going on now relates to proofreading. So we have, for example, Star of the West on the site, and that's been completely proofread thanks to Brett Zamir. He's been working on that for a number of years. Baha'i News has been about 45% proofread. We have transcripts of audio talks on the site that have been about 40% proofread. And once this proofreading is done, then we can go back through and really build in a lot of these layers of information on top of the text, like I showed you, the corrections and things like that. So that's just an overview, kind of like a takeaway from this whole presentation, the work that we're doing, the things that are online, where we're going in the future. We're going to continue to add more images to media, continue to add and correct text. I'll talk a little bit about the origin of the project, where it's why I started it, some of the things I worked on initially. Let me just bring up some other things. So when I first started bahai.works, this was, I didn't have a clear idea about what I was trying to do with it. I just wanted to experiment with taking text that had been in books or had been in letters and putting it online and asking, what does it look like to present this material on the internet? One thing that I did was take the Rizwan messages and as I alluded to earlier, when I put something online, I feel like I take some responsibility for how it's used. So the Rizvan messages, for example, these and other letters that are written to the Baha'is of the world might have terminology that's unfamiliar to people who are not Baha'is. And so that becomes a question of how do you present this information to a general audience and make it clear what we're talking about. And we have a lot of terminology that's not immediately understood. So I take these, what I did when I first started this project is I experimented by linking into bahaipedia. So if there's a link that says Guardian, I'll link to the article on Shoghi Effendi, or a link into the 10-year crusade to explain what that's about, or a link into the administrative order to explain that. So then this is kind of just an experiment back in 2007-8 when I first started, is adding these things, figuring out if there is value in interlinking them. Another example of this is the Kitabi Akdas. There are notes that are referenced inside the text. And so I took those notes and just made them links. And again, this is just an experiment from linking it from the text into the note section. Another experiment was Lights of Guidance and taking something that was a book and figuring out if there's a way to present it on the internet. So the fact that this used to be a book is kind of hidden, and we just present the text and make it so it's easy to navigate, easy to search, easy to link to. That's just an example of these kind of projects that I was working on when I first started. Another thing I was concerned about back then was accuracy, and a lot of the early presentations and software and websites had to strip out the diacritical marks because of software limitations, and I was interested in putting them back and making the text that I was working with as accurate as possible. And so one of the projects that I did in 2010 was to go through the dawn breakers and try and correct all of these diacritical marks and make them accurate. I found very quickly the original text had a lot of mistakes in it itself, and I ended up having to spend quite a lot of time going through the dawn breakers and trying to identify these errors. And actually I was at the World Center at the same time as Dr. Phelps. And so I'd take him my copy of the dawn breakers and I would ask him, which of these, is correct? It's spelled this way in one place and another way and then in another place. And I'd try and ask him, wasting his time, I'm sure. But that was one project. I wasn't able to finish it just because of my own lack of knowledge in the original languages, and I wasn't going to ask Dr. Phelps to do research for me. But these were some of the things I was working on back when I first started the project. I was interested in the presentation, the accuracy, and that kind of thing. In 2010, I had left the World Center, and I had gone actually to Malaysia. I had met my wife earlier there, and I went back in 2010. And that's when I became interested in putting periodicals online, like Star of the West and Bahai News. And some of these had been digitized and made available through custom software or were distributed privately. But I thought there was value in putting these things online and making them more easily accessible and searchable. But because I was in Malaysia, I didn't know where I'd be able to find English language periodicals. I just happened to be in a small Bahai Center in Malaysia, and I think this Bahai Center had probably just one bookshelf, and in this one bookshelf was a reprint of Star of the West, and so I think it was 8 volumes bound in blue. And so I took that, and when my wife future wife was going to work, I took these volumes and I scanned them in a flatbed scanner back in 2010. That kind of started a turning point for the whole project, away from just experimenting with presentation of text that had already been online and like the Baha'i writings, and moving towards the presentation of periodicals and trying to access material, trying to put it online, trying to address the best way to do that. And that brings us kind of back to that picture I showed you. That collection of boxes in my basement is everything that people have donated to me that I've been able to digitize and put online. The one exception, sorry to have to keep going back and forth. The one exception to this, the things I don't have online here, this on the left, there's a selection of the American Baha'i and some books. I haven't put those online, but that'll be the kind of the next project to work on. Some of the challenges with working with Baha'i news and periodicals in general and scanning and digitizing is oftentimes you'll need to redo it later on. This was an image of the very first scan that was made available of Baha'i news, and it was in black and white. And it's fine if you're looking for text, but one of the challenges is that the images weren't able to be maintained in this. And so what I ended up doing when I was able to get a copy of Baha'i News is I rescanned it. And that kind of brings out the images, allows these images to be moved over and categorized and connected with other images and included in encyclopedia articles. I rescanned this series in 2014, and I realized a little bit later I wasn't very happy with the quality of the images, and I ended up scanning it all over again in 2018. So it's been pretty common for me to scan and rescan and sometimes look at things I had done earlier and think, oh, I could do that better now, and then do the work all over again. So I ended up doing this 3 times. So that's one of the challenges of digitizing, is just realizing that there's in the future there's going to be better technology, better ways to do it, and it's a lot of effort that kind of gets needs to be reproduced. I'll switch over to the World Order series and talk about that a little bit. World Order was, I'll get into kind of how I handle the presentation of material online and some of those challenges. World Order had an initial run in 1935, and this was started at volume 1, and then there's another volume 1 in 1966. So sometimes periodicals titles can change, like Baha'i News became Star of the West, became the Baha'i Magazine, or the numbering can change, the volumes can repeat. And how do you present that in a clear way? And how do you make it, if there are 2 volume 1 issue 1s, how do you present that? Because on a website, you can just have one file with one name. So we've kind of taken to those challenges and figured out how to present this material. The best example of that type of challenge came with Baha'i Canada and the Canadian Baha'i News series. Those were basically one continuous periodical, but the title changed back and forth. The issue number, the volume number changed back and forth. And so what we ended up doing is saying, okay, if you want to see this periodical during these years, you go to Canadian Baha'i News, and during these years is Baha'i Canada, and during these years it's called the Bulletin, and during these years it's Baha'i Canada again, and during these years it's Canadian Baha'i News. So it was quite a challenge to figure out how to, organize this information, make it clear, show that it's related. And there were multiple volumes. This is Baha'i Canada Volume 6, and there's another Baha'i Canada Volume 6 here. So there's plenty of challenges in trying to figure out how to put this material online. One of the more recent things we put online is the American Baha'i. And the American Baha'i came with its own challenges because it wasn't intended to be distributed publicly. But after enough time, 30 or 40 years, these periodicals start to have historical value. They start to be useful for research purposes. There are articles in here that can be used in the encyclopedia, information like that. But there's private information as well. There are notices about people who lost their administrative rights. There are home addresses, there are telephone numbers. And how do you manage putting information online that's useful while preserving and protecting the private information, some of the information that was not meant for public distribution? So when I wrote to the National Spiritual Assembly of the United States asking permission to put the American Baha'i online, I told them that I would censor out this information from my work. And I don't think it's necessary for people doing research to have access necessarily to the names of people who lost their administrative rights, 30, 40 years ago, or home addresses. If someone needed that information, they could write to the National Spiritual Assembly and get it from them. So a lot of this, I'm trying to figure out essentially as I go, and trying to think just to myself, what's the best way to handle this? And I can't really know if this is correct or not. Should I censor out the names of people who lost their administrative rights or not? For example, some of the people listed in this, might have committed crimes, and is there value in, preserving that this person might not be someone of good character? Am I protecting someone like that? So these are challenges and questions. I actually ran across the name of someone, a Baha'i, whose name that I recognized, I knew as a very dedicated Baha'i, and that was interesting. So that kind of validated the fact that it's I'm justified in censoring out this information, because that, whatever happened 30 years ago or 40 years ago, that this individual doesn't need to follow them for the rest of their life. Addresses are censored out because that there's no value in having that online. Another type of information we have online are books. And I'll jump back to the website again. A lot of information, interesting information, be in books that other people had put online. The easy thing to working with books is that they were intended for public distribution already. So we don't need to really be concerned with the information that's in a book. It's already gone through the review process. We just deal exclusively with things that are published through the institutions and through the Baha'i publishers. But one challenge that does come up with books is copyright. So what we've done is something similar to Google Books. They allow you to search through a book, but they don't allow you to view the text. And so we have the books that we have online that are copyright protected. We have prevented people from being able to get into the review, but you can search through it, and then you can see, does this book on Iran, actually talk about Iran? You can get quotes, snippets basically from the text. And if you were doing research and you ran across a link that took you to a book, you could know, oh, that's a book that I should go and track down. I should purchase that book or find it for my research. That's kind of the justification for having books online. One last type of content that I want to highlight here are transcripts of audio talks. So there's a lot of talks and videos that have been put online, and that's a great format. One of the downsides is that it's very difficult to find information inside of a video or inside of a talk. If maybe you listen to a talk by someone several years ago and you know that they spoke on something like children, but how do you go back to find that information in an audio talk or in a series of audio talks? So we put the transcripts online and we proofread about 40% of them. And that allows people to search through these transcripts, to read through them if English was not their first language, or if they were hard of hearing. That also gives people access to this information they wouldn't otherwise have. So we kind of are interested in added dimensions to a work. Seeing, if something is audio, can we present it in text? If something was text, can we present it in audio? If something has been proofread, that could be run through a text-to-speech program, and someone who is blind could listen to it, for example. So there are values in kind of presenting these different views. This on bahai.works is exclusively documents, but I've also been given a number of other types of media, film strips, cassette tapes, videos. And so I'll take those and I'll put those on to bahai.media. And one of the most recent projects that I did was the series of film strips that was produced by the National Spiritual Assembly during the 1970s. And I've taken those and put them online, and I've got the original images, I've got the program, and there was a cassette tape that came, Rahia Khanum actually narrated through this green light expedition. And so I created a video, and you can play this video and then listen to her narrate through all of these images. So there's quite a number of film strips online. That's that's kind of something that I can do as people donate material to me and figure out a way to present it online. This project had to actually have someone color correct most of these images because the original format had kind of degraded the quality of the image. So there's a lot of kind of work that goes in the background to this. That's I can talk about if you guys are interested. I want to say that's kind of the end of the overview of what I'm doing and how things progressed and how we got to this point. I don't have anything else prepared formally. I do can't answer questions on technical solutions, server administration, project statistics, if there's interest there in my personal motivations. So I thought I would leave leave some of the rest to specific questions that you guys might have. And hopefully I've given you enough information to be able to ask questions.
David, thank you very much for that presentation. It's a wonderful beginning to our series.